Hi, here we are. This is live at Epiphan. Welcome. I'm George Birchall.
And I'm Dan Wallace.
This is our fourth show. Today we have a few things to talk about, but the big subject today is lighting. Dan's going to walk us through a basic lighting setup, and we're going to talk about some other kind of more out there lighting setups that involve the Super Bowl is one we want to talk about. We have some drones and a few other cool things to talk about. And we've made some changes to the studio. Every week we try and make a few little improvements around here. So sometimes it's lighting, sometimes it's cameras. We still haven't done the cameras yet. That's coming, I hope.
Yes.
And this week we changed up this laptop here is now being fed into our Pearl 2 and to the USB ports on Pearl 2, and it's using an AVIO grabber. So just a little change to make things easier in here. What else have we got? Oh yes, we're on Facebook, we're on YouTube. We want your comments, we want your questions. You can send us an email to live@epiphan.com, and I think that's about it. So how do we light something?
Great. So now that we've got all the housekeeping out of the way,
Yeah.
let's jump right into our first topic, which is, I think, a very exciting topic. It's Lighting 101. Today we're going to talk about some of the basics of creating a 3-point lighting setup. So George, why don't you go ahead and pull up that diagram there on your laptop, and I can just mention it. So here you see the basic principles of a 3-point lighting setup. So in a 3-point lighting setup, you of course have 3 lights. You have a key light, which is your primary. You have a fill light, which helps to balance out your key light, and you also have a backlight. So we're going to do a little demonstration. We're actually going to build a 3-point lighting setup here in the studio live. We're going to use the beautiful and wonderful George as our model today. So why don't we go ahead and we're going to kill the lights in our studio and start from sort of a blank slate here. So go right ahead there. We just lost our key light, and we're about to lose our fill light. Okay, so now, although we're in complete shadow and silhouette, it still looks pretty cool. So what we have on right now, you'll actually see coming down from above my head, we have a backlight. Now, the backlight is usually the last thing that you'd set up, but for our purposes today, I thought it would be neat to just sort of show off what the backlight actually does first. So if you look at George here, you see we have a nice sort of rim of light on his shoulders and coming down onto the back of the head. The reason why a backlight is important and why I would recommend using a backlight is that it actually helps to create some dimension and some depth to your frame. It's going to separate your subject from the background, whatever you have behind them. And it's also going to be useful in situations where, say, you're using a green screen or you want to key out your background. It really separates your subject from whatever's going on behind them. And actually now we're going to kind of move around the studio a little bit, and we'll get our key light set up. So if you follow me over here, okay, we are, hello there, okay. So right here we actually have a softbox. This is a very simple light using CFL bulbs. And usually as a key light, you're gonna wanna have it a little bit higher than your subject and have it project down onto them slightly. You can adjust the intensity of your light by either putting it in closer or taking it further away. So why don't we go ahead, we'll kick this up. George, watch your eyes. And we'll take a look at the effect that a key light has. Now I'm going to adjust the intensity here a little bit. So I'm going to dial it down. We're losing our key light slowly. Okay, so now you're kind of seeing mainly the backlight, but we're going to bring the key light back up a little more. Okay, bringing it up.
How do you know when you've got it where you want it?
You know, I think you got to consider what camera settings you're using, your camera exposure.
Right.
You don't want to blind your subject, obviously. If you get the light too bright, they're going to be squinting and they're going to have a hard time seeing what they're doing. So you don't want to ever have your light so bright that your subject is squinting. But you know, how you adjust the light is going to, the key light especially, is going to affect the mood of the scene that you're creating. So for our purposes here in the studio, we just want to have a nice clean look.
Sure.
So we're going to make sure that George is well illuminated. That's our primary concern without being overexposed. Now, if you see, actually, we'll go back to our main camera for a moment. If you look at George's face, you'll see as you're looking at the left side of his face being in shadow, that's because we only have our key light turned on right now. and it's creating a long shadow off the side of his nose and onto his right cheek. This is known as the chiaroscuro effect. It's actually a term that comes from Renaissance painting with Rembrandt or Leonardo da Vinci. They used this technique to create a dramatic mood. But for our purposes here today, you know, that's not really what we're going for. We don't want him to look like an evil genius or anything like that. Okay, there you go. You got the pose. So what we're going to do is, if you follow me right over here, okay, here we have an LED lamp. This is a great economical and power efficient type of light. We're going to use this as a fill light. Now you see actually this light, we've actually got it a little bit further away from our subject, which is typically what you want to do with a 3-point lighting setup. And we're just going to use this to gently fill in the shadow on the side of George's face. So I'm going to kick this light on, and George, you watch your eyes. Try not to be blinded. Okay, and there it is. You see it's already making a huge difference. And what I can do here is I'm actually going to adjust the intensity of this LED bulb. And as I bring it up, you're going to see the effect that it creates on the side of his face. And as we slowly bring it up, it's starting to get more even. And now we're almost to the point where both sides of his face are equally illuminated. So that's probably not what we want. We want to create a little bit of depth and a little bit of texture and you know, a little bit of contrast to the image and shape to his face. So if I dial this light back a little bit, you're going to see as it gets more and more dim, it creates more of an interesting texture to the image. It's going to create a little bit of depth and dimension to his face, and you're going to be able to see contour and shape, which is what we're going for. So we'll leave it right about here, let's say. Now I want to show quickly another trick that you can use when you're doing lighting. So in a situation where maybe you can't get your light dim enough, or maybe you can't, like here, we don't have enough room to back this light out any further to reduce the intensity of the light on George. So what we can do is just use something like this. Here we have a neutral density gel. This is, you can get this at any photography shop or video equipment shop. This is just a gel that you can put over your light, and what it's going to do is this is actually going to reduce the intensity of our fill light. And we'll see as I do this, if we go back to our main camera, the effect that that has. You see it's actually softened the light a little bit, and it's created even more of a contrast ratio, the two sides of George's face. So I'm going to just dial this up a bit. I think we need a little bit more here, George. You're looking wonderful, by the way.
Thank you.
Okay, there we go. That's looking pretty good. I'm going to come back and join you at the table now.
Great.
And actually, you know, I was mentioning the contrast ratio of the two sides of George's face. You can actually use, if you want to get scientific with it, you can use something like this. This is just a photography light meter, and we can actually take a reading on the left side of his face for our key light, and we're getting an exposure value of 6.3. Now we'll do a reading here on the left side of his face, and we're getting a 5.3 exposure value rating. So
You're just going to see how much range you have between the two?
Exactly. We can actually measure the difference between the key and the fill, and by manipulating that ratio, that contrast ratio, we can create different moods and different effects to whatever it is we're shooting. So yeah, that's sort of the basics of 3-point lighting. There's much more that we could get into on the topic, but maybe we should see if we have any questions from the audience.
Sure, yeah, we did. I was sent one here. We have somebody who asked, what if you only, like we're talking about 3-point lighting, and what if you only have 2 lights?
Okay, that's actually a great question, and I think that's a thing that a lot of people will run into when they're starting out is, you know, you may not have access to all the gear right away. And what do you do when you only have 2 lights? Well, what I would suggest is, obviously, in a situation where you only have 2 lights, you're probably just going to use a key and a fill, or a key and a backlight. But what you can do is you can get creative, and you can try to find ways to use what you do have available to you to fill it, to create a fill. So what I would recommend is you can use something like this. This is just a white piece of foam core. You could also use a reflector or even a white sheet. And what you do is you bring this in just outside of the frame and you reflect the key light back onto your subject, and that can actually make a really nice fill in a situation where you only have 2 lights. The other thing you can do is, get creative. Find a desk lamp or, a window can act as a key light or a fill light. A candle, Get creative. Don't be afraid to experiment and have fun. Yeah. And lighting is something that can really help to tell the story you're trying to tell, and it can also really help to keep the viewer engaged depending how you set up your lights.
So we're kind of just scratching the surface here on this. We want to come back and do more shows about lighting where we talk about some bigger lighting setups. And when I was thinking about this topic today, I stumbled across a few lighting setups for those of you with huge budgets. So we're talking about this little tiny budget. And one of them is something that I don't even know if it's a real product yet, but if you could switch to the laptop, Spencer, we'll show people. It's like MIT, in the labs at MIT, they have been working on this system with drones where it would work like the drones you would set up your lighting perfectly with your drones, and then as your subject moves in space, the drones move exactly in accordance, so you always have consistent lighting no matter where your subject moves.
That's cool.
So it's kind of an unrealistic thing that you'd really want to set it up to have the exact lighting, but you do have issues when your subject moves forward out of the light or to the side and they move into the shadow. So just trying to keep a consistent light, like everybody knows, it's a hard thing to do. So you might be able to use drones to help you out there.
I mean, the other thing, of course, is that the lights that we have here in the studio are fixed. They have to be on stands. Yes. You can't really move them that easily. Having the ability to have a light that tracks and moves would really be pretty incredible.
Well, and in a big situation like a huge hall where you have $100,000 pieces of rigging set up, so giant cranes that move in with cameras and stuff, if you can do all of that with drones as well, you're going to potentially save a lot of money that way. Like, it could be a lot more efficient for people to use that. So
be interesting to see where this goes.
Yeah, it's being used right now. Like, there are big productions using drones. So I also came across this other guy who does these. He makes these beautiful pictures he takes a drone and he attaches all these lights to it, and then he flies over city streets and you get these incredible shadows and views that you just couldn't get with any other kind of lighting. Like, it's like a flashlight on a grander scale, really, and it's pretty exciting to think just one of these applications that you can do with drones, among others. And another thing that led me to this other rabbit hole which I went down, which was the Super Bowl when they used the drones. And so that was an Intel project where Lady Gaga goes up on stage.
An amazing experience.
By drones. And of course they're programmable, so they can make it do whatever they want. You have this network of hundreds or thousands of drones that are all coordinated together at the same time. So
that's pretty amazing.
Pepsi and Intel kind of got in the game there. So yeah, it's kind of exciting to see where we might go with drones and lighting as well. So
that's amazing. I bet they got a few phone calls about UFOs after doing something like that.
I bet you. Yeah, UFO settings are pretty much going to be ruined for forevermore.
Yeah, what are we going to do? Okay.
Yeah. So I'm just going to see if we have any other questions here. Is it better to adjust your lighting by the way the person looks or the way it looks in the lens? Oh, okay. So maybe they mean like, do you adjust your camera setting or adjust your lighting?
Got it. Well, to answer that question, I think ultimately you want to make sure that your image looks good in the camera at the end, right? Yes. That's the goal. Is ultimately you're creating video content. You want to make sure what your camera sees is what looks great. So what I would suggest is start with your key. Everything starts with your key light. Once you get your exposure set on your key light to somewhere that your camera can see it well and expose properly, then you're all set. So using a light meter is one great way to do that, because then you can measure, right? So if I know that I have an exposure value of 6 on my key light and I'm exposed properly in my camera, I can then say, okay, for my fill light, I want to have maybe an exposure value of 3,
right.
And then I know that I've got that 2-to-1 contrast ratio from my key to my fill.
Right.
But at the end of the day, use your eyes too. use your judgment with your eyes.
Sure.
If something looks too bright, it probably is in your camera as well. But ultimately, you're exposing for your camera, so you want to adjust your lights to what your camera is seeing first and foremost.
Okay. So that's pretty much it. We've got a couple of little things. We're going to be back here next week at the same time. We're going to have Dave Kirkin here, our VP, and he's going to be talking about NAB show, which is coming up in 2 weeks. We're going to be there, of course, and there's lots of exciting things happening there, so we'll touch on that. Send us your questions. Live@epiphan.com is our email address. We'll put it up afterwards. And you can post comments in the threads on Facebook and YouTube. And what else we got? Anything else we got to mention? That's about it.
I think that's it.
Yeah. Thanks, everybody, for watching. See you next week.
Bye.